On 29 May 1988, something no one could have imagined until recently was seen on the tarmac of Moscow's Vnukovo Airport, the American Presidential Special Aircraft Air Force One. President Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy are getting off. The fourth Reagan-Gorbachev meeting is about to begin on Soviet territory for the first time. The leaders of the Soviet Union and the United States will sign a treaty to substantially limit short and medium-range nuclear missiles. But there is more. The Cold War between the two countries, which had shaped the course of events on our planet for 40 years, is clearly over. On the surface, it might seem like a draw, but it's not. In fact, it's an overwhelming American victory, and it will soon be confirmed by the collapse of the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe and the dissolution of the Soviet Union itself. Two days later, Zrenya, Reagan and Gorbachev strolled through Red Square, drawing applause from the locals. Even though they chatted and joked with people, it starkly contrasted the circumstances that had led up to this moment. People were applauding and waving flags in honor of the man whose uncompromising policies had succeeded in overwhelming their country, exhausting it economically and imposing a peace model of his own. That is why Ronald Reagan is regarded as the man most responsible for the downfall of the communist regimes across Eastern Europe. He was born in Tampico, Illinois, surrounded by cornfields. His father was an alcoholic and frequently unemployed, while his mother was extremely devout. Ronald was the middle son. He was a good student and worked hard, but never had many friends. He graduated high school and completed his bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois. After that, he began work as a radio reporter in neighboring Iowa. He put his storytelling talent, which he'd had since childhood, to good use here. For example, he commented on baseball games based only on bits and pieces of information he received over the telegraph. He made up the rest and made it colorfully. Once, when the telegraph went out, he completely retold the entire, rather long passage of a game. In 1937, he was in California on business and nailed the camera test at Warner Brothers Studios. And he succeeded. He was undeniably handsome, with an athletic build, a pleasant voice and demeanor, and a nice smile. He landed his first role in Love is on the Air that same year and starred in an impressive 60 films. He played likable characters. While some of his films succeeded in their day, he was never nominated for any of the major film awards. This is in stark contrast to his first wife, Jane Wyman, whom he met in '38 on the set of Brother Rat. She subsequently won the Oscar and 3 Golden Globes. Reagan was exempt from deployment to Europe during World War II due to an eye defect. Instead, he worked in the Army's film propaganda department. After the war, he became president of the Actors Union and led it when the hunt for communists was on in America. Especially in Hollywood, lists of real and perceived communists and their sympathizers were being made, with people losing their jobs, being interrogated, publicly shamed, and in some cases, arrested. Always good with words, Reagan sided with those who carried out the purges. It emerged after 2000 that he had even reported some of his colleagues to FBI agents using the codename T-10. The fact that leftist studio workers openly threatened him during the tumultuous year of 1947 may have played a part as well. Regardless, the transformation of a staunch Democratic Party voter and admirer of President Roosevelt into an ardent anti-communist was complete. At the same time, his personal life also took a twist. He divorced Jane Wyman and, 4 years later, married Nancy Davis, with whom he would remain for the rest of his life.
Commander Abbott.
Case. I was afraid you wouldn't come.
In 1957, they starred together in the film Hellcats of the Navy. By then, Ronald Reagan was better known as a television character than a movie actor. He hosted a regular show on CBS called General Electric Theater, where he presented half-hour adaptations of short stories or plays sponsored by General Electric. Reagan appeared in some of the episodes, but more importantly, he always gave the opening and closing remarks. More or less, these were sponsorship messages, and he delivered them with the utmost professionalism and charm.
Good evening. Tonight, General Electric devotes its entire program to an exciting half-hour musical production starring Judy Garland.
Even today, he deserves high praise for his excellent work. This show, which he produced himself in later years, also made Reagan rich. In addition, he worked as a motivational speaker for the sponsoring company, and within 8 years, he would have traveled virtually all over America, speaking to 250,000 General Electric employees. He acquired invaluable skills over the years, which served him well when he entered politics in the first half of the 1960s. He joined the Republican Party's most hardline faction, and went on to win the 1966 California gubernatorial election. Once elected, he took control and made his mark, making many enemies. He was undoubtedly criticized for his forcible suppression of the 1969 Berkeley protests. The police force used live ammunition, which resulted in the death of one person. The subsequent deployment of 2,000 National Guardsmen was a brutal assault on democratic freedoms by the protesters, who were primarily students at the local university. Nevertheless, Reagan was undaunted and was re-elected governor in 1970. He then attempted the ultimate stunt. In 1976, he contested the Republican nomination for the presidential election, but was narrowly defeated by incumbent President Ford. In 1980, he was back and ready for the final battle for the White House. Despite being considered undereducated and too simple, he proved in the debates with his opponent, President Jimmy Carter, that he could address his audience perfectly. He even demonstrated his ability to juggle traditional economic terms like crisis, recession, and recovery, which his opponent had brought up as a key issue.
A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his.
He crushed his opponent, winning 44 states. On 20 January 1981, a few days before his 70th birthday, he became the 40th President of the United States. He successfully defended the presidency in the next election. At the time, he was the oldest president in history, with his opponent, Walter Mondale, 17 years his junior. He soundly defeated Mondale, just as he had Carter 4 years ago. He spent nearly the entire 1980s in the White House. Initially underestimated, he quickly proved himself a formidable politician with a clear vision and the courage to take responsibility. When the air traffic controllers in America went on strike, he had 11,000 of them fired and replaced by military personnel. The disaster scenarios didn't materialize, and he celebrated a great success. He would introduce an entirely new economic policy, dubbed Reaganomics, and cut taxes dramatically, especially on the wealthiest. This would kickstart substantial economic growth. Cuts to social programs would inevitably lead to greater inequality between rich and poor Americans. Experts still debate whether Reagan's economic model was brilliant or the very one that caused many negative phenomena, most notably the tremendous increase in the national debt. There were outright scandals too. The most notorious was the discovery that the Reagan administration had secretly sold arms to hostile Iran in defiance of an international embargo and used the money to fund rebel groups fighting the leftist government in Nicaragua. Yet Reagan not only survived this scandal, he thrived. His demeanor and nonchalance, which he applied to brush all unpleasant subjects off the table, earned him the nickname Teflon President. His most challenging moments came just 69 days after his first inauguration. A mentally ill 26-year-old named John Hinckley attempted to assassinate the president because he was platonically in love with actress Jodie Foster and wanted to attract her attention. He fired 6 shots at the president, seriously wounding him and 2 security guards as well as White House spokesman Brady. Reagan was shot in the lung, but his condition improved rapidly after surgery. The assassin was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a mental hospital. He was released in 2016, 35 years later. The Reagan administration saw many developments, but none matched the impact of his approach to the rival superpower, the Soviet Union. He dared to publicly label it the evil empire and chart a bold new course, rejecting his predecessor's cautious diplomacy and appeasement. One of his advisors recalled that he had first heard the phrase, "win the Cold War," from Reagan. Until then, he said, no one had considered it. Reagan did it his way. He made a clear decision to launch an arms race that would put the Soviet Union down economically. From the outset, Moscow regarded him as a gunslinger, wholly unpredictable and capable of anything. So when he began deploying medium-range nuclear missiles in Europe, and later followed this up with the SDI program called Star Wars, which was supposed to be able to intercept any missile fired at the United States, the Soviet leadership knew they had to take action. They had no choice but to weaponize too, but their economic power wasn't enough. The Soviet government was spending up to 40% of its state expenditures on arms, which was unsustainable. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, a representative of the New Thinking, came to the Kremlin, and relations between the two superpowers and their top leaders began to improve. Reagan knew he was close, but he was also aware that the most dangerous stage was about to begin, with the Soviet Union effectively on its knees, and so he continued with his initiative.
If you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
He signed the Nuclear Arms Limitation Treaty with Mikhail Gorbachev during his visit to Moscow in May 1988. This was the first time the two countries had ever agreed on anything like this. It was a defining moment, and for Reagan it fulfilled his goal of forcing the Soviets to make peace. A few months later, Ronald Reagan formally handed the presidency to George Bush, leaving the stage as the undisputed victor of the Cold War. He had achieved a goal that no one had dared to name before: